Hey, it's Nino again. Question. Have you ever wondered what Photoshop is doing when it selects skin tones? That is, when you come up here to select menu and go to color range, and then you choose skin tones, and you play with your fuzziness slider, and you look at it and you go, well, okay, it's working on this shot, which is, I carefully selected this shot because it's ideal. The only skin tone on the shot is skin. So we don't have any weird masking issues except a little bit on the hair. But, there you go. We have a result. We can't pick a zone and we can't, move any other slider except fuzziness. And then I have detect faces, which clearly some kind of AI thing. And we know, if you have any experience with this, that you play back and forth until you reasonably have a skin tone selection. And sometimes it's great. Sometimes it's a complete dud. And you're like, well, okay. For example, let's give it something a little more complicated. So we come to this shot and we go to color range and we go to skin tones, and we're missing a lot of skin tones. So we ramp it up and 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 ramp it up. And we're wondering how it's making its choices. Sometimes we think, well, let's go one smarter for it here. Let's give it a subject selection first. Give that a second. And then we go to color range, skin tone. That helps us out. Now we don't have the background involved. Hooray, technology. And we're like, well, I don't know why. It's just not going to pick these deep shadows over here. It's just not, even at 185 fuzziness. And what the heck does fuzziness even mean? And why is it when I go low, it gets like a hard edge to the selection? And then when I go higher, it seems to soften it. And if I go, okay, that's not entirely clear. And then what about a shot like this? Okay, let's give that a subject selection as well. Just to kind of, because we have all that red behind her. And then we'll go to color range and we'll choose skin tones and we'll ramp it up. And, we're getting something. And we're like, that's kind of cool. I'm not surprised that it's on her outfit, but at the same time, I'm wondering why it's not in here, in her shadow, on her neck. And if the outfit is so red and orange, why didn't it select a lot of it? It can get kind of confusing. And if you're like me, you've looked at all your shots and you've gone through so many processes to figure out, let's do subject again. You've gone through so many processes to try this. And what is it that it does with color range? Because it's not completely obvious. And like I said, sometimes it succeeds and sometimes it doesn't. And you can generally work with whatever it gives you to a degree. Well, if you're like me, you've also figured out better ways to do it. Like, for example, we give it chroma data. So one way to do that, let's do like a gray chroma. We're going to go ahead and do a 50% gray luminosity on a duplicate layer. That's chroma data. So now that's one of the chroma data that we can do. So now we do a subject selection. This is just a recap because we've talked about this before. Okay. And then we go to the chroma layer and we hit color range. And now at fuzziness of 20, it works better. Why? And then if you ramp it up really high, to 200, yeah, it works clean, but we're getting a lot of different things. And why is it that when I go to a lower number, it seems to get sharper and stronger? When a higher number, it gets softer. I like lower numbers when I'm using chroma. What the heck is it thinking? What is a skin tone? What does it consider a skin tone? How does it think about it? Is it full AI? Is it literally a set of parameters? So it got me to thinking, and I have a bunch of other test images here, and that's lovely, but I came up with this test pattern and a whole test project, if you will, big PSD. And I want to go over it with you to explain to you how I use this to get me an idea of what skin tone on color range is doing. And I have some variations on it, including some different visuals to show you what happens when you use white chroma data, gray chroma data, and just for fun, we have black chroma data, even though that's usually a disaster when it comes to skin tone selection. So what is this? Well, I have the first bar on top. If you look at the first bar only, which is this beautiful spectrum, we have every hue angle, top to bottom, from cyan to cyan, okay? I did that because I wanted red in the middle, because red is such a pronounced skin tone color that's involved in all skin tones. So I shifted the usual red to red spectrum, and I shifted it to cyan, which is the 180-degree rotation. Anyway, from left to right is fully saturated. Let's turn on our titles. From left to right, full saturation, plus 100%. And on the right is negative 100 saturation, so no saturation. This is a perfect linear blend from full color all the way down. And then curious about what it might decide on darker versions of colors, muted versions of colors, which not necessarily less saturation, but less brightness. So I have a 20% black overlay, 40%, 60%, and 80%. I reasoned that a full down to, super dark, like, 95% probably won't be in the range, in the skin tone range. On top of that, I didn't want to create a blend from 0 to 100, even though I did in terms of the black overlay, because I really want to see how it behaves at these specific percentage overlays. Okay. We also tested, in a minute, I'll show you what happens when we brighten the overlays and darken the overlays in terms of what color range does with skin tone selection. So this is my test pattern. Now, the methodology, just to show it to you, I'd go to the composite base. I'd come here to color range, I choose skin tones, and you already see we have a result. Okay, so this is the skin tones at 20. Okay, we look at what we're getting. All right, I do that, so there's 20. I now get a selection. I could have, inverted it before I said okay, but I'm going to go ahead and invert the selection now, inverse it, and then I would fill it, everything that wasn't the selection, with a 50%. I'm just showing you the methodology, that I used. And then I create a layer, and there is an idea based on my test pattern. That is what color range skin tones at 20 fuzziness gives us based on the test pattern that I have, which again, if you look at the titles, this is a 40% black overlay, 20 and full color, right? No black overlay. Okay. You can see sort of where it lives. Let's go ahead and get rid of that because I've made them all for you. We're going to go over them now. Okay. Let's look at our composite. Okay. We have a couple variations here to show you my analysis. Okay, the first thing that we notice in the composite, we have color range for skin tones set to 10. This is a fuzziness of 10. This is what Photoshop sees. Okay, with the test pattern that I showed you, which is this. Okay, at 10, it really focuses on full brightness. It doesn't seem to pay much attention to the 20% and darker, obviously. Okay, so there you go. That's you can see, and you notice that we're in the pinks, oranges, and reds in various forms of that. Okay, so we'll get to the darker versions as well in a minute. Okay, 20. Okay, we just saw this one. This is a variation of 20. It does allow for more into the 40% black overlay, a little bit of 20. Now, what I did notice was that we have some green tones. That's the first thing I noticed when I did this test. I went, why are we getting green tones in the selection? Well, don't have an answer, but I do know that, like, if you take red and green and mix them together in paint, like an oil paint, you get like a brown. And I thought that has to be related somehow. Then I thought about on lighter skin, you see veins that are green and blue under the skin. Not sure. These are just, hypotheses at this point. Okay. Now, I did mention to you earlier that we had also what happens if we brighten everything linearly with a white overlay and then darken it further with a dark overlay. Okay, so this is the normal one based on my 0, 20, and 40%. 60 and 80 were not picked up by the 20 fuzziness. Let's see 20 fuzziness with a white overlay. Okay, so this is what it found. As you can see, we have a black, let's turn off the title so we're not misguide you there. But when everything was brighter, now it opened its head up a little bit more. It said, oh, okay, when I have a brighter situation, then I can see a little bit better. What is it doing? It is looking at this. This is a faded version of the same test pattern, okay? But it's brightened 35%. Not with curves, not with levels, but a linear brightness to bring every single, brightness data up 35, okay? And you know what? It found generally more of a broader range. Okay. Well, what happens if we do a black overlay? As you can see, it found much less. So this is already taking the original test pattern and making it darker from this to this, and it found less. When you have a dark image or a particularly dark image that's underexposed or whatever, it's going to find a little bit less. It still gets the same tones, but there's a lot more greens involved, which I thought that's interesting as well. So let's close those brighter ones, okay? Now, let's review. 10. Put on our titles. 10, 20. 20 with a white overlay. So in other words, slightly brighter, what it does on 20. Slightly darker, what it does on 20. Normal at 50. Now at 50 fuzziness, we really start to expand. And on the darker areas, it's almost exclusively focused on green. I don't know why. There's just a ton of green, but there's a lot of brown in there. perceptively there's green, but there's actually a lot of brown in there. Tons of green in here as well. But if we start using our eyedropper, okay, so we come here and start using our eyedropper, we start realizing that we're getting a lot of muted colors, a lot of muted greens, okay, and some darker browns and some muted browns and some muted greens and some purples and pinks, okay? Interesting. All right, let's look at 100 fuzziness. Now, we're starting to see some breakdown. First of all, the banding that you see here, this is just probably just some calculation image data breakdown for my test pattern. I doubt this has anything to do with the way color range works, but you never know. But as you can see on the 40% black overlay range, 100% fuzziness just completely selects all this muted area. I mean, 100%. See how the pattern, the bar, the middle bar is completely selected? We didn't see that on 50. We started to see the hints of it. But then by 100, it's completely just dying and selecting all of this muted area for some reason. I don't know why, but okay. Now 200. 200 on just about all of these patterns becomes a disaster. On this 80% black overlay, it loves everything from green, pure green, all the way to these yellows and reds. And some of them make sense to me visually, like that looks like a skin tone to me, right? Come up here and so that looks like a skin tone to me. I'm not sure why this looks like a skin tone, but green is involved. Curiously, blues and cyans simply are not. Magenta is hinted at, but blues and cyans are the only thing that's completely cut out. You see hints of it over here for whatever reason, but initially at quick glance, you realize, no, there's not really blues involved. So that's normal. Now, let's go back and remind ourselves, as we open up chroma white, we're going to remind ourselves what what 20 looks like. This is the 20 fuzziness based on the normal test pattern I created, okay? Now, let's see what 20 with chroma data looks like. Same fuzziness, but whoa, what happened? Why did it open up so much? The reason why it opened up so much is that when we pull chroma data, what we're doing is removing brightness luminosity data, right? When we do that, it sort of gives Photoshop some X-ray vision into shadows. Because see, this is what ends up being selected, okay? But this is the data that you're sending it. Okay, when you send a chroma overlay, like I did a minute ago, we did a gray one, but you can do a white one too. I'll show you gray in a second. This is what you're showing Photoshop. It creates a selection based on this, but then you pull the chroma data away and you say, okay, now use that selection on my original image. Therefore, it chooses a broader, stronger range of actual skin tone, even into the dark areas, which is why it selects skin a little bit better in shadows. Okay. Let's see, possibly, while we put our test pattern away, let's see if we can find an example of that. Perhaps. I might have closed it, but that's okay. All right, let's go ahead and find the image in question. Give me 1 second. I'll pop right back with that image because I want to test it with white chroma to give you a visual. All right, so here's a good image that'll give you an example of why we use chroma data sometimes for our skin tone selection to give Photoshop a better view. We have skin tone in all kinds of situations. We have highlight here, we have shadows, we have a little bit of color grading on it because this is a final image, but sometimes you have casting anyway, color cast of some kind. So it's a good idea to even test final images. The skin tone is to our brain very obvious, but to Photoshop, not so much. So we were to come here to subject select just to make sure that we remove that background, even though it's probably not a whole lot involved. Then we go to color range. We're at 20. As you can see, we're missing quite a lot of the skin tone range. And as we expand, it gets slightly better, but it also doesn't. And we're going to get worse and worse and worse and into the whatnot. So it's okay and it can work. But what if we use white chroma data? Now, even at 20, we're already better off. And the more we expand it, the more it starts peering into those shadows a little bit better without getting into the other area. So her left leg back here in the shadow is our problem area, but it's a pretty easy fix, all things considered. But look how sharp everything else is. Okay, we barely started getting into her outfit here and even peering into the shadows behind her. Okay, that is why we do chroma data. Now that peering into the shadows concept is what we're seeing here. When we have white chroma running, okay, we can see it looks into the shadows, and that's white chroma at 20, okay? Even white chroma at 10 is about the same. And you might think, well, it's a radical difference, or rather, it isn't a radical difference. If you recall, 10 on normal and 20 on normal, it expands into other ranges. And you start going into 50, it really expands. But 10 in chroma white, and 20 are not that different. 50 more range, but still not that different. Okay. When you start getting to 100 and 200, which is mostly for demo, as you can see, it just becomes kind of a mess. This is now we have magentas and blues and cyans up there. 200 is just too much for the most part. But even at 50, it's not that different from 10. It is, but it isn't. And you can see how this hard line sort of edges here. And again, these bars, I'm not sure what these bars are. I'm not sure if that's a calculation degradation or, I mean, it's at 16 bits. I don't think that's it. Or if it's the way color range thinks. Not sure. Don't know that information, but I do know it's probably nothing to worry about. It still gives us a good visual, right? Okay, so that's white chroma. Now, what about gray chroma? Okay, we're going to leave white chroma available to us to compare and contrast. By the way, that white chroma, excuse me, this was at 5, not at 10. And at 5, you can still see how much it notices, because when you remove the luminosity data and just leave the chroma, Photoshop can see much better. But look at 5 on gray. Oh, it's a little tighter, isn't it? Somehow or another, that gray chroma, when you pull the luminosity out and replace it with 50% gray and blend it in, it doesn't let Photoshop see as much, which is not always bad. If you can see on this 5, the range is very focused. It is red and yellow, mostly red. From darker to lighter is mostly red. Sometimes we want that. It's laser targeted in. The white one opens up Photoshop's brain to greens and a little bit more than that, which is interesting, I thought. Okay, gray at 20, very similar to the 10. We can still peer into the shadows with more range. And of course, 50, a little bit more. And like always, 100 and 200 just kind of become too far, okay? Just to kind of give you an idea. All right, and by the way, this is what a layer looks like, the test layer. This is chroma gray, created from the composite test pattern. And then this is chroma white, created from the composite test pattern, okay? Now, just for grins, like I said, we have chroma black, just to kind of show you. This is what the test pattern looks like when you have chroma black. And if you put it, this is interesting. I have no idea why this happens, but this is interesting. All the way to 155, from 0 to 155, this is what Photoshop sees on fuzziness. 0 to 155, this is what you get. 156, you get this. And then from here on out to 200, it doesn't change much. It just gets messier. At 156, it jumps to this. And I don't know why. That's why I've always told people chroma black isn't that useful. By the way, as a counterexample, so you kind of get an idea, if you tell Photoshop to just select reds, this is what it gives you back on the test pattern. Pretty straightforward, pretty expected. It does consider magenta and yellow to be in the, quote, reds range, because that was a color range that you just chose reds. You might recall that, or you may not, but just to show you, if you come to color range and say reds, you get what you get. There's no choice. There's no selections. There's no options, etc. You get reds. And to visualize that so we can kind of see as a benchmark, this is how Photoshop's brain works on color range. And this is what reds are. Okay. So as you can see, black is useless. We're going to leave that closed. Okay. But the normal composite, in other words, the normal test pattern at 10 for a skin tone range, this is a fuzziness of 10, and you don't get a whole lot of range. At 20, it starts getting more usable. But interestingly enough, a lot of green being involved, of course. All right. And then, of course, if you brighten things, you know, if you bring everything up linearly, then it sees a lot more. So if you have a brighter overall original image, then it's going to select a lot better. It doesn't like the dark colors as much, which we can prove with our black overlay. Even at the 20 fuzziness, it doesn't find a whole lot of super, super dark colors. Now, that has very little to do with, again, race or nationality of a subject. I've tested thousands of images of all kinds of races and nationalities, and the hue angles of the skin tone is basically all the same. Okay. The darkness, if you will, of skin is a perceptive thing. It's not necessarily reality. It's not necessarily reflected in the data. So this makes sense. And having used skin tone selection for all kinds of races and nationalities, I do get consistent results. Where I get also consistent result and failures is when the shot is high contrast, extra dark, extra overexposed, etc., has a deep shadow going across it, etc., color cast. Yeah, so it's pretty consistent. I'll give Photoshop that. There has to be some reason why Adobe chose the data that they chose to capture or to target with skin tone, from color range. But I want to show you this today to give you an idea of what we can do to give it better data. And this is why white chroma at 5 is one of my favorites, up to 20 maybe at sometimes. It just really can see into those shadows to find out what's going on. So in general though, if you're always curious and you always want to know, let me turn these off real quick. This is my test pattern covering a huge range of tones. And if you tell Photoshop, give me a fuzziness of 50 on skin tone range, this is what it sees. In case you were curious and you're wondering, because I was wondering, and this is what it sees. So it's kind of fun. If you guys are interested in this test pattern chart or some of these, let me know. We can try to provide it. This one's extremely high res because when I do these test patterns, I like to be able to really kind of look and see what's going on, kind of get an idea of what's happening. If you have any questions at all, please leave them below or email us ndp@ninobatista.com. I hope this visual, if nothing else for curiosity, gave you an idea of what Photoshop's color range, skin tones, fuzziness is all about. Just remember, when you start getting to 100, we really start getting some, I don't know, some strange decisions. And at 200, it's really making strange decisions at this point. It's taking a ton of muted tones, and it's just all over the place. Why in the brighter areas, it suddenly has blues and magentas are involved and cyans, I don't know. At 20, you can see how it's limiting and why you usually want to ramp it up. And when you send chroma data at 20, you can see how it's not limiting and why I recommend it so much, why we have NDP Actions 12, Chroma plus Luma. And just about every new action sends Actions 12. If it does a skin tone selection of some kind, it uses chroma data. Is it always better? No, but it's usually better, and that's why we do it. So here again, any questions, let us know, leave a comment below, and I hope you enjoyed that little analysis. If you'd like to see more of this kind of thing, also let us know that too. Thanks for watching.